Here for episode 2 of Let's Talk. We're going to talk tonight about resolving conflict. Not that we know much about that, not very often, but so thankful to be back here with you tonight. At the end of our time tonight, right about 9 o'clock, we're going to jump on a Zoom. Links will be provided at the bottom of the Facebook comments, or on Instagram, a link provided as well, or you can go to lifeaction.org/let's talk if you're watching from there. At the end of this conversation tonight, around 9 o'clock, again, we'll have a link to that Zoom call. You can join in with us. So be thinking about questions as we go along here tonight, and be asking those to us later on as we gather at the end of this time tonight. So again, we're just going to jump in here to another thing that's been so important to us in our marriage relationship. And now that we're quarantined, there's certainly a lot more opportunity, Mags, for conflict in marriages, and we've discovered that as well. And here's the reality: everybody has conflict. Every marriage has conflict because no two people are alike. We don't have the same preferences, the same ideals, the same motivations. And because of that, conflict really is inevitable once you're in a relationship with somebody.
Yes, so we just want you guys to know that if you are experiencing conflict, even on a daily or like hourly basis, it doesn't mean you have a bad marriage, a terrible marriage, or that you're a bad Christian. It actually just means you're normal. You're a normal functioning human, and you have differences. And so we do want to talk about, though, what the purpose of conflict is, because there are actually some good purposes to it. And we want to talk about some healthy ways of how we can navigate through that.
So, Mags, what is conflict?
Well, I looked it up on dictionary.com.
Good for you.
And according to there, conflict just means coming into collision with someone or something. Disagreement, it means a fight, a battle, and oftentimes it can mean profound struggle and prolonged struggle.
So the reason why we experience conflict is because we're all trying to build something. These collision points that are happening, we're all individually working on our own kingdoms. We're trying to build these things, create these things. We're describing a kingdom as something that you can control, where you rule and reign, where your influence, where what you say happens. And so each one of us comes into the world with this desire to build our kingdoms, to build these kingdoms around our lives. And so when you have a marriage relationship, these two kingdoms are kind of coming together and begin to have these collision points, right? So when our kingdoms are encountering one another, colliding with each other, we experience this thing called conflict. So I'm going to put on my crown here, Mags. This is my kingdom right here that I'm representing tonight, the kingdom of Burger King. So do you have a crown that you're going to wear to establish your kingdom tonight?
I'm going to represent my kingdom of Maggie with the kingdom of Maggie, who eats tacos.
Yeah, so sometimes people ask us when we're doing talks like this, can you actually get into real life conflict? We'll see if that happens tonight as we walk through these things. But here's an example, right? This is one of the ways that we find ourselves in conflict most often. And we talk to couples all across the country. The toughest and most likely place for conflict is often where to eat after church on Sunday. So I would say that I want to eat at Burger King in my kingdom. That's where we want to go. And Maggie, you're wanting to go, it looks like, to Taco Bell for your kingdom.
I usually say, wherever you want to go, babe. And then whenever you pick, then I say, yeah, that's actually,
that's not wherever I want to go.
That's not really where I want to go.
Yeah, so we have to compromise and find a place like Hardee's Red Burrito that serves both to be able to satisfy both our kingdom's cravings.
I think Hardee's is confused about their kingdom.
Yeah.
But anyways.
We should take these off now because we look a little bit ridiculous. All right. So when our kingdoms collide, this is when the thing called conflict happens. So Mags, just share a little bit more about conflict.
Yes, again, we have conflict because we have differences, different personalities, different outlooks on life, different junk, that we both brought in to our marriage because we had different upbringings, different expectations. That's huge for us, the expectations one. And so we get into all these rifts with each other. And we thought it would just be funny and to help you feel better about yourselves, to tell you some actual things that we have thought about in our marriage, maybe today, maybe 10 years ago. We won't let you know how long ago it was.
Most of these for sure have happened sometime in the last 4 weeks that we've been quarantined together, but certainly over some point in time in our married life. So I'll start. One of the first arguments I remember having was the ways that I was folding the towels incorrectly.
This is true. The funny thing is I was arguing with Brent today that I never was upset about how he folded the towels.
I distinctly remember.
But he remembers. So we got in conflict about our conflict. So, okay, so here's one: how to load the dishwasher.
It's true. There are right and wrong ways to do that. How about throwing away the leftovers? I don't think leftovers ever go bad.
When they reproduce, they are bad.
That may be
when
true.
They smell.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a big one for me: clanking your spoon on your cereal bowl.
I have to make sure I get every last bit of cereal and milk out of that bowl.
So maddening.
And if I try to drink it, it gets all over my beard and it just doesn't end very well. So, well, how about how dinner was cooked? Like your inability to follow the same recipe twice.
You know what? I just think you should be glad that I cooked dinner.
That's probably true.
Okay, so also we've thought about how we should groom ourselves. Like, do you really need to leave toenails in the floor?
Do you really need to go all of quarantine life without shaving your legs? Like, it's time now.
It's completely acceptable.
It's not. I still have to be around it, and it affects me in profound ways. All right. How about misplacing your keys or your cell phone or bills that we weren't able to pay?
Yes, that happens a lot. Okay, also clothes being left on the floor.
I'll probably wear them again, is the reality there. But
that's why we have drawers. Okay, so
how about things that we bought?
Yes.
Like cream of tartar that has sat in our cupboard unused for years now.
But we did eventually use it, so we did need that cream of tartar. We had a fight in the store about if we should get cream of tartar. Okay, so things we didn't buy, like the name brand ice cream. Clearly, you need name brand ice cream.
That is my bad. I'll own that one. That was my mistake. Yep. House projects we decided to do last minute and didn't have time for.
Or house projects we never finished.
Or still are finishing, yeah, and may not ever finish. How we parent.
How we drive.
You cry out to Jesus a lot when we're driving, sometimes unnecessarily.
Yes, if I'm not in control, I cry out to Jesus.
How we spend our time, that's been a big one here when we've had more time together to observe one another's habits and behaviors.
And who got mad first?
That's certainly one that we get into argument about a lot.
The only reason why I ever get mad at you is because you got mad at me.
That seems rational. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then finally, the messages that we teach. So actually, almost every time we go to work on one of these talks, one of these messages that we give, we find ourselves getting in conflict about that. So when we look over a list like this, we do seem to be kind of experts at this conflict thing, experts when it comes to creating conflict, that is, and maybe that's helping us develop some of these skills that we're going to be talking about on how to navigate that conflict better. So we don't think we're experts at this. We're learning and growing with Jesus' help on ways to do this well. So Mags, we should talk about the 4 goals of what healthy conflict looks like. Why don't you share those?
Okay, so 4 healthy goals. As we go along, we want conflict to become, number 1, less frequent. Number 2, less intense. Number 3, unifying. And lastly, if you are a Jesus follower, we want to represent God well to the world.
So why don't you start with that first one, less frequent. What does that look like? How should that be a goal of ours?
Okay, so we noticed we didn't say no conflict, because if you're breathing, if you have a pulse, you're going to have some conflict. Again, it's inevitable. It happens to all of us. But we want to go from a place of maybe when we began having lots and lots of conflict to a place where we're actually growing and we're learning to understand each other, and we're learning to lay down our pride and our wills. And so we want conflict to just become less frequent.
Sorry, we don't want to have a goal that's unrealistic, like saying that we're not going to ever have conflict. I think that just leaves you feeling frustrated. I remember early in married life thinking that we should be past having arguments by then and having conflict by then, and that was true. We shouldn't be bringing up the same things over and over. But the expectation that you're going to arrive at this place where there's no longer conflict, I think is unrealistic and not even healthy. I think sometimes if we do find ourselves in a place of not having conflict, it's because we're not that close to one another. We're not on the same page. Our lives are not headed the same direction. And so our lives have to overlap, have to be headed in the same direction so that there are those collision points, those opportunities to see where We need to come to some sense of agreement where we don't maybe necessarily agree. The goal of marriage is oneness. That means the two kingdoms becoming united under one kingdom together, growing closer together. And in that process, you will have those collision points. You will have conflict. It doesn't mean you should be having loud shouting matches or heated debates every single day or multiple times a day. That's not healthy. We'll talk about that too. But occasional conflict, we believe, is normal and healthy.
Yes, there's this proverb that says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person actually sharpens the countenance of their friend. And that picture is a picture of collision, of two things clashing together. And so sometimes we wonder, well, what good could come of collision? But the good thing that comes out of it is that sharpening actually ensures that your tools are in proper working order. As we have collision points, it means that, I lost my place, we are functioning the way that we should. We're actually maximizing our impact on the world around us. And so that's what healthy conflict can actually do and serve in marriage.
Yeah, we both had to grow in different areas with understanding what healthy amounts of conflict look like. I'm the middle of three boys, so that meant growing up, I had great competition up and down the food chain, opportunities to compete for conflict. It also meant that I learned to become a pretty good peacemaker. But early on, before I had Jesus inside of me, I was really good at instigating lots of conflict, sometimes unnecessarily, a lot of times unnecessarily. I never met a conflict or an argument that I didn't want to jump in the middle of, or one that I wanted to create out of nowhere sometimes, just for the sake of argument. That's kind of my bent and my MO. I love a good argument. I love a good debate. A conflict actually motivates me in some ways, especially when I can win and the other person loses. That's kind of how I'm wired and motivated. So I've had to learn over time that conflict over the same issues should be decreasing. It's not a good goal to have no conflict. It's also not a good goal to have frequent conflict, to always be finding things to debate or argue about. Maggie, you've had to learn a different way, a different side of that value of conflict.
Yes, because I grew up in my personality, I'm a conflict avoider. So all my growing up years, I would just avoid conflict at all costs.
Like the plague.
Yes, even if that meant I wasn't even being my true self, because I just wanted to make peace with everybody. And so what that meant is I just stuffed everything down. And so I've had to learn over the years, and I'm still learning this. It's still really hard for me to get my words out, that it's actually not helpful to avoid and to stuff everything down and to ignore, because it doesn't make it go away. It just makes it to where we're not actually dealing with our real issues. And so we don't want to ignore our conflict. It doesn't go away. It just makes it intensify.
Yeah, so again, that first goal should be less frequent conflict over time. It's something that we're working on with Jesus' help. Second one is this: it should also be less intense. So that passage, that iron sharpens iron, gives this picture of tools being refined, being prepared, being ready to be used in a most effective order. If you know anything about blacksmithing or working with metal, over time, the closer that object gets to its final product, as you're hammering it, as you're shaping it, the spark should fly less. That should be true of our marriages and our conflict within marriage and relationships as well. The reality is, though, the longer Maggie and I have been married, now 12 years, knowing each other from 14, I actually know now how to push her buttons better than I did, say, early on in married life. I've gotten to know what makes her tick, what makes her angry, what makes her respond, and I have to be very careful and intentional not to push those buttons.
So another way to make conflict less intense is to simply avoid anger, which is a really big one for a lot of people. And so when we feel, we're in the middle of colliding and we begin to feel our blood pressure rise and we feel that thing welling up inside of us that just wants to explode, we have to practice self-control and take a time out. Like, we send our kids to time out so they can settle down and think about things, but grown-ups need time out too. So a lot of times we need to take 20 minutes, go out in the garage and work on something, or go outside and blow off steam. But it's not helpful to actually try to manage your problems while you're really, really angry. There's a proverb that says, a hot-tempered person stirs up strife, but someone who's slow to anger actually quiets contention. And so we've seen this in our own relationship. We're learning how to keep our voice calm. Usually one of us is not calm, but if the other person can respond with a gentle, soft answer, then that clues the other one in, okay, I need to calm down and stay level-headed. It tends to diffuse the situation. So if you're not normally the calm one though, no, if you are normally the calm one or the stuffer, this sounds like it's about to go against what we just said. But if you're used to being a stuffer and holding everything inside, you might actually need to experience some intensity for a little while, just so you can learn a different way of communicating. Like you might need to yell your words out or just throw everything up, even though it's ugly and it doesn't make sense or you're afraid of what it sounds like. You'll need to work on doing those kind of things so that you can come to a place where you're getting your words out.
You sound like you have some experience with this, being a stuffer and getting your words out. You should share one of our favorite stories about this.
Yeah, so again, Brent grew up yelling everything, debating everything. And again, I grew up stuffing it, avoiding conflict. And so as you can imagine, when we first got married, he was yelling. Anytime he got mad, he would just yell his stuff, like blah, blah, blah.
I didn't sound like that.
That's exactly what it sounded like to me. And I would hold it in because I thought, oh, that's more spiritual. I have to hold it in. And, but after, who knows, a couple of years of this, I remember one night, very specifically, we're at some family's house spending the night. It was like midnight and Brent's doing his usual blah, 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 blah. And I'm stuffing. And all of a sudden I felt this anger and this intensity. It started about right here and it rose to the top of my head. And once it reached the top, I just exploded. And this is kind of funny to admit, but I began cussing like a sailor to Brent. And I told him, words I didn't even know that I knew those words. And I noticed that he started agreeing with me all of a sudden. And he backed down and his eyes got really big. And I learned a really valuable lesson that night. We don't recommend it, but I learned that if you don't normally cuss, then when you do, it's actually very effective.
Yeah, we definitely don't recommend that. That actually goes against most of what we're trying to say with all this. So you have to remember that you can't stay angry. We need to speak kindly, especially when things get tense in a conflict situation. Use soft words. Don't use cuss words, okay? Use a soft tone. Say what you're feeling in a gentle way, not accusatory or out of a place of hurt. You know that old phrase, don't fight fire with fire. You will not make that conflict resolve itself. You will not make it go away faster by using anger and being hot-tempered in those ways. You have to be calm in the response. I love this picture. Proverbs 15:1 says this: a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. We've all seen how when somebody has lost their temper, how that is not going to diffuse a situation. We actually walked our kids through this a few minutes ago after dinner. They were having an argument and one of them was very hot-tempered. We had to send them out of the room to go compose themselves so they can come back and think about it more rationally, respond more calmly so it didn't get more intense in those moments. Maggie, another way that we can continue to this process of making it less intense is by asking questions. Why don't you share about this model that we've learned from our friends on how to ask questions in the moment of conflict and observing things that are bothering us?
Yeah, so there's a little model, we call it OIC, but it stands for observe, interpret, and then clarify. And so observe just means you walk into a situation and you just say, okay, so this is what I'm seeing. You're not accusing anybody. You're just observing your surroundings. And then you can interpret that and begin not with blaming, but with saying, this is how what I'm seeing makes me feel. And this is what I'm thinking about that. And then to clarify, you just want to get on the same page and see their perspective. And so you say, can we just clarify what we agree on or what we believe about this? And we do that because we don't always have the full picture and we don't immediately know the other side of the story. And what happens is our default is to assume the worst about our spouse. And we can live years assuming the worst, but we want to change that and begin assuming the best, and then just ask our curious questions, and then we can avoid a ton of conflict if we work at it from that angle.
Yeah, so if we begin by making statements, especially accusatory statements, rather than asking questions, we're already starting from a place of defeat. Statements will harden the will. Questions will speak to the conscience, and it'll help you really get to the bottom of what's going on there in the other person and get to resolving that conflict more quickly, more calmly, and getting on a more unified approach. So again, to be less intense, you have to avoid anger, replace it by speaking kindly, and doing so and asking questions can be really helpful. Third goal of healthy conflict resolution, we believe, is that it can actually be unifying. Now, this can seem confusing. How can conflict actually bring us as a couple together? Can it bring two people together? How is that going to play out? When you get married, you don't just have your own kingdom anymore. We mentioned that a minute ago, the kingdom of Brent or the kingdom of Maggie. You've agreed to enter into a shared kingdom, but sharing that kingdom and all of its resources, all of its influence, all of its abilities takes time to come up to that shared kingdom together. It takes time and really a lifetime to understand how to share that kingdom life together. You're still going to have different perspectives, different ideas. You're two very unique and different people that God's brought together, but all those need to come into submission to the kingdom that you share together. That's the joint kingdom of your marriage relationship. That's ultimately under God's kingdom and what he has and wants to do in the world around us as well. And that's why God says all throughout his word to submit to one another. It's not just a process of the wife submitting to the husband, but jointly submitting to one another, serving one another, loving one another, so that your kingdoms can be advanced and built together.
Yes, so when we have those collision points, we want to learn how to lay down our pride and our control. And remember that the goal, again, isn't one person winning over the other person, but the goal really is unity. And we need to remind ourselves that we're not actually each other's enemies. We have an enemy, the devil, but we're not each other's enemies. We're actually on the same team. And so as we remind each other that we're teammates, then that helps us with unity. So
some friends of ours a couple of years ago introduced us to this idea that unity always trumps disunity. Now, there could be areas of agreeing to God's word and somebody's trying to go against God's word. Unity is not important in that matter. What God's word is the ultimate authority of our life says matters the most. But in biblically gray areas, and there are a lot of those in marriage relationships, unity always trumps disunity. We can always celebrate when the decision that's made, when the outcome of that conflict or that disagreement brings us closer together. That's something that we can celebrate. So unity always trumps disunity. Another way that you find that unifying approach and that the reality that you can't bring your kingdoms together on your own is that you have to seek God's help. I don't know how couples make it without God involved in the picture. A lot of couples obviously don't, but it's been impossible for us without remembering that we belong first to God's kingdom, and he actually desires to bring us closer together. He wants to help us. As Jesus followers, we want to remember that we're fully dependent on God's help to navigate conflict well and move towards each other, but we do get stuck all the time. Thankfully, God tells us in James, so much practicality in that book. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. God is waiting to give you his heart, his desires, what he wants out of that situation to you, but we have to ask him. We have to humble ourselves and say, I don't have the answers here, God. I need your wisdom. I need your help. Please help us figure out what the right decision is here.
yeah, and a part of asking for help is we may need to reach out beyond ourselves and actually get counseling. And so we just want to go on record for saying that there is no shame in reaching out beyond just the two of you when you're stuck or you don't know how to work through things, or the other person, you just don't even know what the issues are. Counseling is a wonderful, wonderful tool, a much needed tool to help you get unstuck. And sometimes it's actually like the best thing you can do. And you can even be in ministry and need counseling. You can be a Christian a really long time and love Jesus and need counseling. We've, even as recently as this last year, I've reached out to a friend, a couple of times and said, we're stuck and we need someone else. We need another voice. Will you speak some truth into us and just help us to see a different perspective.
So whether that's a professional in that area, a friend, or a pastor, or somebody that just cares about you both, don't be afraid to go get help together or to get help individually and then coming together to discuss those things. Sometimes that's the best step to actually resolving conflict, is getting outside opinion, outside help. All right, fourth and final one, Mags. We're almost to the final stretch here. So we believe that the fourth and final goal of all conflict should actually be to make God look good and represent him well to the world. Now, again, how can conflict, something that seems to be so divisive, so problematic, so painful, so hard, actually make God look good and help represent him well to the world? We have to remember that he is the most treasured possession, the most valuable thing in all the universe. It's not about building our own kingdoms again. There's an eternal kingdom, God's kingdom, that matters the most. We have to orient our lives around building God's kingdom first, then orient our marriage together around building God's kingdom, not the kingdom of Brent, not the kingdom of Maggie, not even the kingdom of Brent and Maggie together, Team Burger King, Taco Bell. Okay, we have to work on building God's kingdom first and foremost. Conflict with somebody else provides us an amazing opportunity to evaluate our motives and our priorities. It helps us to see what's really going on inside of us. What matters to me right now? What's most important to me? Am I caring about loving this other person, laying down my life for them, serving them, loving them well? Or am I actually caring about myself? Am I actually being a good kingdom citizen, caring about what God wants, putting him on display, giving him glory through my life and through our marriage? Or am I caring about myself through all of this?
Yes, God's kingdom is a kingdom of light and a kingdom of love and beauty and wholeness and peace. And it's this beautiful place where the citizens of that kingdom can actually flourish as we were meant to flourish, as we're made to, and can be made whole. So when we walk through conflict and can work with Jesus and become humble and patient and kind and gentle, we actually demonstrate to the world who watches eagerly on what God himself is like. So none of us, Brent doesn't get to represent God to the world on his own. I don't get to represent God to the world on my own. Together in marriage, we're both representing a fuller, more beautiful picture, hopefully, of what God's heart is actually like. Differences and all. And doesn't the world need a better picture of that?
I think absolutely. In a world that seems more divided than ever, a picture of two people who are very different, who have very real priorities and values that don't always align, being able to come together in spite of their differences, working on joint decisions together, bringing God glory, gives an amazing picture of the gospel that the world needs to. All right, we're going to wrap up this time here. Thank you for joining us again. If you want to jump over to the Zoom call, we'll be on here in a minute. We love getting to talk to you to a group of you that we can't see. We like it even more when we can jump on Zoom and see your faces and talk a little bit more about what this thing called conflict looks like. You maybe have questions, things that we addressed that we didn't get into very much detail on, that you want clarity on, or additional questions that we weren't able to touch on. That's a safe space to come and ask your questions. We have a team of people there that we'll also tap into. It won't be just Maggie and I to help give some answer to those. So jump on over to that Zoom link. It will be in the Facebook comments below. If you're on the Life Action website, they should be right there on that Let's Talk page. If you're on Instagram, you can head on over to Facebook, the Life Action page, and find that. It may be here in the comments as well in the next few moments, or head over to lifeaction.org/let's talk to jump on that Zoom call. Great to be with you tonight. We'll see you next time.